So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to a location that really needs no introduction. I can't help but feel as though the battle at Minas Tirith was really the and Helm's Deep is really the thing which sold people on making the original Third Age mod for Medieval 2 way back in the day, and it's been quite a long time actually since we've seen this map, albeit it is a slightly edited variant, and I think we will be seeing more emphasis actually on the exterior of Minas Tirith than we would normally, evidenced by the fact that, as we can see based on the layout here, it should be fairly obvious who is who, with the Rohirrim tucked in behind the hill over there, and they will be cresting that momentarily, I'm sure. And then we also have the Gondorians defending their settlement, joined this time by Dol Amroth, which is of course law-friendly, and the Orcs obviously in the far distance with all of their siege towers, and you can even see, even at this distance, the Mumakil do stand out somewhat, don't they? But this is also not the longest siege of Minas Tirith, actually. I mean, 33,000 frames is still a perfectly long battle, of course, but these battles on this map in particular have been monolithic in the past sometimes, and often to a fault, because that usually means that there has been some sort of retreat to the very narrow corridors that Minas Tirith does have going up all of its various layers. But we won't be seeing that this time, I don't think. I think we will be seeing mostly an outer layer and an open field occasion with the Rohirrim and of course the Dol Amroth cavalry as well, and there is going to be more of an emphasis on mounted units in general, which is odd for a siege, but very, very appropriate for here. So we'll start off with Red Knight, who's playing as one of the attacking forces, of course, playing with Mordor. Temple Inquisitors, who, considering the fact that this is going to be a very mounted unit heavy edition of Minas Tirith, this is one of Mordor's best tools for dealing with that. Obviously the two-handed sword that they wield in melee, a couple of units of them, is going to be very, very useful at trying to fend off the heavy knights of Dol Amroth and the deadly riders of the Rohirrim. We've got the Sauron's Will. Armour piercing is still going to be very handy, especially when it comes to trying to wrest control of Minas Tirith itself away from the defenders. Obviously Gondor do tend to rely fairly heavily on their own armour values, so trying to crack through that with some armour piercing is understandable. The dismounted variant of the temple units we've already seen, the Executioners here, obviously a very, very strong unit, able to go toe-to-toe with any other two-handed sword in the game. Not necessarily outright win, but they can definitely hold their own. It'd be interesting to see actually a face-to-face between them and the vanguard of King Alisar or the Haven Guard, for example. Got a couple of units of the Morgul Chosen, so some of the tankier units of Mordor Orcs. They're going to be important when it comes to fending off cavalry as well because of their spears, but also at trying to establish beachheads within Minas Tirith itself. And just in behind the Blackguard of Barad-dûr, who will probably be the main vector behind the attackers trying to get those wins, I think. Trying to push their way into the settlement quickly, because the sooner they can get into the settlement with all their armies, the sooner they can be rid of the danger of all the cavalry that is going to be buzzing around them. More Morgul Chosen over here. We've also got the Orc Maulers, who are not as effective, of course, as the Sauron's Will, but still plenty of armour piercing in their ranks. We've got more Orc Maulers, some Halberds as well in for the mix. This is a scary part of the army, though. The Nazgul and 2 Olag High. We saw in the last replay when the Olag High were taking control of an Umbar settlement how effective they can be, and also the longevity that they potentially have. But cavalry is one way that you can deal with them reasonably quickly, so we'll see if that comes to pass. And some Uruk chieftains as well. Moving on to the next force, we have Deprezito. Interesting. Temple Executioners. We've got the Uruk Infantry, actually the first instance of that we've seen in the Mordor roster so far. Very basic, but very numerous, and that is of course a feather in Mordor's cap. Temple Guard, armour-piercing projectiles, possibly more useful actually at warding off cavalry, unless they can get onto the walls quickly. It remains to be seen how Gondor can test those. Uruk Halberds, we've got more Morgul Chosen as well. Artillery in the shape of the Troll Catapult. Obviously Minas Tirith is ripe for the outer walls having some holes punched in, which is not always the case for custom settlements, but it is for Minas Tirith, so they will be there. And Orc Javelins, of course, always a very welcome sight for a Orc army. Very cheap and very effective at what they do. More Orc Maulers and Morgul Chosen, a real heart of the armies here from Mordor by the looks of things. More Uruk Infantry here. More Blackguard of Barad-dûr. The Beasts of Gorgoroth are here, so they're going to be supplementing the numbers of the Mumakil. Individually nowhere near as tanky, but there are more of them, and they can cause a little bit more chaos as a result. We'll see how they do on the open field. And then some Uruk Chieftains, so not quite the level of high-end Orcish units that his ally does have, but still. The Easterlings are represented here as well by Holy Banana. He has got the Dragon's Wrath Guildsman pushing up a siege tower, and some Gamprim in behind. Obviously the Runic Halberds are better than the Mordor ones that we've already seen. Carmel's Immortals for the rank and file that Rhun will be wanting to utilise if they can, effectively in melee, and not letting them get punctured by too many arrows. That is their Achilles heel. Balcoth Tribesmen, the Flagrim of course with that armour piercing in melee, should be good against a lot of what Gondor and Dol Amroth can bring to the table at the very least. The Dragon Knights, very tough unit of heavy cataphracts, Knight class as well, so they do have that anti-cavalry bonus, which is going to be important of course, as we've already said. That is going to be very, very key when it comes to deciding who wins and loses this. Rim as well, more Flagrim, and then we've got the Carmel's Chosen in and amongst the units here, and then at the back, a couple of heavy spears, the Scion Rim, similar to the Morgul Chosen really, only they are a little bit stronger in terms of their abilities in comparison to the Mordor offering. And last but not least, we have the Southrons of Harad, played by Mevin. He has got a couple of units of the Serpent Camel Archers, again, going to be very useful when it comes to trying to ward off that cavalry pressure, which is going to be coming their way. And really the defensive aspects of the attacking cavalry is going to be the important thing here, because we know what the Rohirrim are all about. We also know that Dol Amroth can bring an awful lot of aggression to the table in that regard as well. Southron Warband will play their parts, as well as the Southron Pikemen. Again, individually speaking, these units are maybe not the highest quality, but the armour piercing they do have is a nice little accent to them, in spite of their own defensive shortcomings. Serpent Guard as well, numerous, good in melee as well, maybe not quite as tanky as other equivalent units because of their slightly lighter armour, but they do quite well in melee with those scimitars of theirs. Several units of them. Got some more Southron Warband, got some Serpent Guard here, so some Lance Cavalry. They're going to be pretty swift across the field, but how will they do in melee against some heavier cavalry? Got the Hashari as well, so the Harad assassins joining the runic ones. We've got the Serpent Archers at the back, and then two of the Mumakil. Obviously, as you would expect, the most iconic part of the Minas Tirith siege, I would suggest. Now then, we shall move on to the defenders, who are spread all across the field really. Here we have Faramir's Retreat. Colonel Speaks 46 is going to be playing as the Gondorians, the central pillar of the defence. Guards of Osgiliath fleeing from the recently lost ruined city. We've got the Lords of Gondor here, who are at the moment in full health. We shall see how that goes, if they have a better fate than they had in the film. We've got more Guards of Osgiliath, we've got some Athelian Rangers as well, Veterans of Osgiliath and more Athelian Rangers, so a very appropriate force to be retreating. I mean, the Guards of Osgiliath as a covering of the retreat means that the fast movers are going to have a little bit more of a problem dealing with this perhaps than they otherwise would. And then we'll move on to the central defending force first of all. We do have the sallying out of the very resplendent Dol Amroth cavalry. Some of the best looking units in the game, I think, are the standard Swan Knights, interestingly enough. Very deadly off the charge. Obviously Dol Amroth, even with some of their regular cavalry like this, enjoy a heightened charge bonus, usually reserved for only the finest cavalry units, so they're going to be very deadly. We've got the Haven Knights as well, who are going to be in there as a good melee cavalry force. The Arathirim, one of the most well-rounded units of knights in the game. The second unit of Haven Knights also, so not skimping in terms of quality anyone here. And the Dol Amroth cavalry will be moving out, I'm sure, to try and cover the retreat of the Gondorians, because if they can get those Veterans of Osgiliath and those Guards of Osgiliath back into the settlement, they can be ideal defensive forces. Axemen of Lasarnak are already here, however. That armour piercing will be especially helpful against the Orcs, and that is something which is shared by the Citadel Guard, so that's going to be handy as well with those Javelins. Fully upgraded Gondor Archers, Nimlothian Honour Guard as a central pillar of the defence also. So again, unsurprising to see the levels of armour upgrades on display here. Fountain Guardsmen, always a very, very strong unit for the Gondorians, and the 3 units of them here. Again, not a huge force which is back here though. They are reliant on managing to retreat those units and then the cavalry reinforcements bailing them out, because a portion of a Gondorian defensive force, as well as some of the units back here, so the Dol Amroth infantry force, is not going to be enough all on its lonesome to be able to provide relief. But yeah, the Dol Amroth Halberdiers, the Perithil Champions are in here, a very strong unit of heavy swordsmen of course, as well as the Talon Knights with their maces. Belfalas Marines in and amongst here as well. As a custom scenario, the red limit doesn't really come into effect, but as always, the Belfalas Marines are a much bigger part of what Dol Amroth are all about now. Nimrodale Rangers as well, so plenty of Ranger presence for the defenders here, and the Haven Guard, of course, which you can see Imrahil actually, presumably a part of that force. I think he actually rode out in the cavalry, didn't he? But maybe that was a bit too dangerous. Anyway, we have the Rohirrim, and very fittingly, a complete cavalry force by Arbiter. We've got the Sons of Yall, we've got the Aerid of Aldberg as well. I mean, plenty of these cavalry units are not going to be multiple HP, so they are going to have a more limited shelf life perhaps, but this is an awful lot of lances which are pointed towards the attackers, and it's going to be interesting to see how they weather that storm. They do have enough pole arms and spears to make it a little bit uncomfortable for the Rohirrim, but this is going to be an awful lot of force and mass heading their way, and we may be seeing something akin to the movie, at least initially. Aerid of Aldberg, we have a lot of them in fact, so the Aerid of Aldberg really the central pillar of this force. Lords of the Mark and the Sons of Eorl, of course, are the bodyguard tier versions. Actually, there is one infantry unit. The Medicel Guard are here. They're going to be sort of following the cavalry through and I guess poking anyone who's still barely alive with their spears. We've got the Riddermark Skirmishers, also going to be useful for dealing with the melee cavalry that the attackers will inevitably throw the Rohirrim's way. Then of course the Red Shields are also capable of mucking in melee. So yeah, they've got the Shield Maidens and some Westmark Marshals as well, Riders of the Fold here at the back. Maybe less Horse Archers than I was initially expecting, but plenty of Lancers. Again, one of my favourite looking units in the game from an infantry standpoint are the Westmark Marshals. And then, way over on the other side, we have Ricky Beagle, who's playing as the Gondorian reinforcements. So I think these guys were primarily from Lasarnak, I think. Pelagia as well. So yeah, Axemen of Lasarnak and Pelagia Marines representing much of this. We also have some more cavalry in the shape of the Gondorians this time. Lords of Gondor and the Penith Galen cavalry. I mean, in fairness, Gondor's roster doesn't have the greatest variety in cavalry. You have the Lords and the Penith Galens and the standard one, and that's about it. So not too surprising to see these guys here. So yeah, real pincer attack being set up, but it's whether or not that very limited Gondorian defensive garrison can hold on long enough. And then you have the vanguard of King Elisar, so I guess this can represent Aragorn's arrival, albeit this time without the army of the dead. So I think we will actually just get straight underway, because it's probably going to get underway very fast as the retreat is going to be pursued very, very quickly. So let's get this show on the road, shall we? So let's see if Faramir's retreat is a little bit more successful in terms of the amounts that make it back into the White City this time around. It looks like the cavalry are going to be the last ones perhaps to make their move, and that might be a little bit of a problem for them if the Temple Inquisitors do manage to catch up to them, and I think the other mounted units are also starting to make their way forwards, but then again, so too are the forces of Dol Amroth. And very, very hefty cavalry from Dol Amroth, and their melee cavalry as well should be more than a match for the examples from Mordor. Now the Lords of Gondor, well, it looks like they were going to retreat, but then I don't know if they got caught on that rock or what, but they then decided to turn back around, which they need to flee in short order if they are to survive. But now lances down from the cavalry from Dol Amroth. I mean, initially that charge will be quite nice, but the Swan Knights, as resplendent as they look, they won't like being in melee against the two-handed swords from the Temple Inquisitors. Meanwhile, this is actually a pretty bad fight for the Cardinal's Dragon Knights, and it's rare that you see them struggle in a straight-up brawl, but they will against the very best that Dol Amroth can field in that sense. Certainly Camel Archers as well, moving around, possibly going to try and use their bows on something like the Guards of Osgiliath. I mean, they will do a little bit better in melee than most Horse Archers will. So Horse Archers, Camel Archers of course, and that's because camels can scare horses, albeit in terms of Medieval 2's mechanics, that's never really been super important to how they handle themselves. Dol Amroth spreading out throughout the field now, the Lords of Gondor being pursued by the Dragon Knights and Temple Inquisitors as well. I mean, part of the problem here though, cavalry won't particularly enjoy the prospect of trying to charge into those Guards of Osgiliath. So unsurprisingly, the choice of target is going to be the archers, both the veterans and the Athelian Rangers. They'll be warded off pretty quickly by the Haven Knights. Poison arrows, not really going to be the most important thing here. I mean, morale debuffs
are not going to be enough to convince Dol Amroth's finest to flee. Temple Inquisitors again getting into melee, but sandwiched in between two units of heavy cavalry. Meanwhile, I mean, the Temple Inquisitors did charge in. I mean, the initial charge will be all well and good if the pikes are not facing the right way, but as soon as they turn around, pikes will absolutely melt cavalry, unsurprisingly. The Runic Riders charging in once again, real heavyweight clash between them and the Arathiran. Very similar kinds of units, but the Haven Knights will certainly tip the balance of power into the defenders' favour. Certain Camel Archers still losing a few shots. I mean, the infantry is still a fair distance from the walls. So for the time being, yeah, good choice of target there from the Camel Archers, going after the unshielded pikes. And the Guards Mosquelet have got pretty decent armour values, but far and away really the best choice here, because you're not really going to put too much of a dent in the cavalry units that are on display. Lords of Gondor, meanwhile, still 20 of them remaining. Carmel's Dragon Knight starting to struggle a little bit, even shaken. Rare that you see such a high level cavalry unit think about fleeing in the early stages of the battle, but then they were up against one of the few units that can really do the business against them. Up close, Temple Inquisitors also starting to hemorrhage their manpower a little bit. That's something else as well. If they can preserve the lives of some of their knights here, they could really bring the heat when it comes to cavalry presence when the reinforcements inevitably crest the hill on the left there. Still a few riders way out in the distance. I think the standard Swan Knights have been dealt with pretty handily. Carmel's Dragon Knights are a little bit scattered actually as a unit. The Lords of Gondor, I mean, they may very well get back into the walls, but they're going to take a little bit more damage yet at the hands of both the arrows and the scimitars of the Dragon Knights. They may even actually find themselves completely cut off. They had the opportunity to retreat into the settlement, but they weren't really quick enough on the uptake to take it. There's only 11 Haven Knights remaining now, and a few more of the Arathiran, but I don't know. Numbers starting to dwindle. Only 9 of them remain. Surely they can get back in now. They get their lances down in an effort to do some return damage to the Dragon Knights, but again, this is not where they are at their best, the Lords of Gondor. Pure shock cavalry, they don't have a bonus against other cav in melee. They rely pretty much entirely on their pretty beefy defensive stats to see them through in this sort of situation, and when the odds are what they currently are now, that isn't going to be the easiest thing. And the Camel Archers also piling in. So yeah, even the Dol Amroth cavalry now is looking like they may not be able to contribute later on in the battle. They do manage to get their pikes and their rangers back into the walls, however, and that is a couple of very important defensive vectors for the defenders to use. They will need them to be able to lock down those positions, and they need to keep the enemies outside the walls for as long as they possibly can, because so much of their power, of course, is bound up in all of that Rohirrim shock cavalry. The Haradrim still a little bit further behind. It will be Mordor that arrive first. And the final few Dol Amroth riders now falling by the wayside. There's some Haven Knights in here as well, albeit it's the banner carriers. And they continue to fall. That is that. They have finally, I think, completely cleared up the mounted sally out from the defenders. Back within the walls. I mean, now the time has come to set up your infantry into a defensive shape. Still a little bit too far back. Like I said, they do need to contest the walls for that reason of keeping the enemy out. If you allow them onto the walls, then they'll funnel as many of their troops up there as possible to avoid the inevitable sting from both sides, really. It's not a matter of the Gondorian reinforcements from Pelagia and Lasanak. It would come the attacking forces, East of Gorgoroth as well. Dragon Knights. 2 in one unit, 5 in another. I'll be reasonably happy with their performance though, especially given the nature of their opponents. Spreading out a little wider. Then Rhun and Harad following their Mordor masters closer to the settlement. So there was the Dol Amroth contingent of the infantry over here. And now, yeah, there it is, the trebuchet. I mean, simulating the trebuchets that were on the walls, and actually a very fortuitous hit there, managing to burn down one of the siege towers almost immediately. And getting some good hits on the infantry just in behind as well. Only Orc Maulers, but still the damage will add up over time. Pretty good amount of kills actually, considering the loose formation that the Mordor infantry is in. It's not as if they're hurting for an amount of siege towers here. And Rhun will also be bringing up their own, so they can certainly still blanket the walls. And another hit. Damage done. It will at least slow their progress onto the walls if they can collapse a few more of these towers. Sauron's will be a tough opponent to deal with. I mean, still, there's only one unit up on the walls here so far, the Belfalas Marines. You may as well throw some javelins. If they're the first line of defence, then they're going to be engaged in melee sooner than later. Interesting to see how they get on against the Orc Maulers, actually. The Orc Maulers' defensive shortcomings may be the issue for them. One of the Mordor armies arriving on the scene a little bit quicker than the other. Certainly the defences around here are a little bit more solid because the Gondorians have got more of a focus around their infantry. At least this army does. Will the Maulers be the first ones onto the walls? I mean, the Olag High clearing a spot could be the way to go, honestly. And range is certainly not going to be an issue for the trebuchet when it's way up there. So they can pretty much pick and choose their targets in the attacking army. And the attackers will have to keep themselves in loose formation, which will prepare the ground quite nicely for the inevitable cavalry action that we're going to be seeing later on. Trolls. Maybe not as grand as the site of Grond, but this is what we're going to have to use our imagination a little bit there, I suppose. So I can see a couple more infantry units on the walls now. I mean, perhaps they are concerned about the troll catapult crumbling sections of the wall with important infantry units still on it, and that's fair enough. You need to make sure that your infantry is at least close to the doorway so that they can get up onto the walls quickly. So they're going after the runic force now, yeah, getting a hit on those flag rim. Still stacking themselves up, perhaps waiting for the other units are in position before they begin their attack in earnest. And this very much has the feeling of just trying to hold on. The amount of infantry that the defenders have in here is such that they kind of need to go all in on the outer defence anyway, and then get bailed out later on. Yeah, thudding into the siege tower there. Each hit does 20% damage, so you do need 5 to crumble it unless it catches fire. Siege tower's now latching onto the walls, so are Mordor going to start scaling these towers now? So there they are. It is going to be a unit of Orc Maulers. Yeah, Belfalas Marines. It would be a bit of a shame if they didn't use any of their javelins here before inevitably getting engaged in melee. Second unit of them down there. I mean, Perithil champions would cleave their way through the Orc Maulers, you would suggest. Mordor chosen doing the same again to a completely empty section of wall. Yeah, if you were still microing cavalry in the outer field, then maybe fair enough, but There's no excuse for dragging your heels here. Fountain Guard are ready. Moving across. Fairly overwhelming force here. And now the Mordor Chosen setting up on the walls. Yeah, at the very least, some of the reinforcements for the defenders are going to be in the shape of infantry from the Gondorian ones from the south. Harad champions did get up onto the walls now, and Belfast Marines are going to be able to get some point-blank shots, which will surely hasten the demise of this initial wave of orcs at the very least. And completely free real estate that the Mordor Chosen are claiming. Fountain Guard have been able to block the advance of the Uric infantry. Again, this is going to be a decidedly one-sided encounter between those two. Uric infantry getting onto the walls as well. Over here, but they're going to be met by the Axemen of Lasarnak, so all of the two-hander Gondorian infantry units should be fairly comfortable with the task that has been given to them. 3 siege towers, however, right next to one another, so electing not to crumble any of the walls, at least for the time being. I mean, it's a little bit more cinematic perhaps to see all of the orcs pouring out of the siege tower. And we'll be joined by the Easterlings over on that wing. How long could they keep this up for? The trebuchet continues to plug away at some of these units in the backfield. The Practical Champions have taken a bit of damage here. Perhaps the sheer numbers of the orc maulers are the problem. You have to back the Dol Amroth infantry in this sort of situation, surely. Although perhaps not now. Temple Executioners upping the ante a little bit. Fire arrows being utilised. Is this Rangers using fire arrows? It is. Never really in favour of that because of the added ammunition cost of it. I mean, you might be able to rout the Orc Maulers, but I kind of doubt it now that the Temple Executioners are fighting alongside them. More of the wall being taken unopposed, really. And this does mean as well that Dol Amroth will find themselves cut off from at least directly linking up Gondor. They can retreat up their own pathway over here should the need arise. Is the ram in place yet? Will be. Beasts of Gorgoroth are preparing to try and charge through the breach as well. Between them and the Olag High, you have to wonder if the Gondorians will actually have the ability to stymie the momentum that Mordor could gain here. Axemen of Lasarnak doing their thing still against the Uruk infantry. Arrows from the low ground, however, standard Gondor archers, not the most damaging, but in this sort of situation where they've got a completely free shot, that will just be the little additional support that the high damage Gondor infantry will very much appreciate. Meanwhile, Harad, I thought it was going to be the Easterlings, actually gets the Haradrim first. Trollmen, a real danger to the Gondorian infantry, of course. That's probably where any Gondorian arrows would be best served. Serpent Guard aren't particularly great for a line infantry in terms of absorbing that sort of punishment either. Yeah, Harad and Gondor, one of those really interesting matchups, as we've said many times before. Both their strengths and weaknesses sort of perfectly intermingle against one another. It's in this situation where, especially with that range support, you probably back Gondor as long as they can continue to get those shots. I mean, maybe the Citadel Guard's javelins would also not go amiss. And the main gate has now fallen, and the Olag High are going to pour through. More Olag High now, and Gondor archers are definitely not the ones that you want to be sending forward to deal with them, and even the pikes are not going to be that fantastic. It's actually maybe a bit more of a problem that all of their high damage infantry is actually contesting the walls at the moment, which they are doing quite well at. But And there we see, in the distance, the Rohirrim start to crest the hill. One unit charging ahead of the rest? Surely not. Surely you want all of them going down the hill. Select all. Well, the Lords of the Mark are leading the way, which is pretty fitting, I suppose. Carmel's Immortals are the ones that are blocking the way as well, so this is going to be a pretty nasty charge. They're not going to have anything really in store for the Rohirrim in terms of anti-cavalry. Again, if they did have like Uruk halberds on the front, as would be probably the most equivalent unit to what we saw in the movie, because of Medieval 2's mechanics, the charge would be far less impressive. But yeah, Carmel's Immortals going to be bearing the brunt of this, and now this is where things are going to get a little bit more dicey for the attackers. It's no longer a simple siege. And again, charging in layers, I don't think there's going to be really anything left of the Carmel's Immortals by the time the Rohirrim cavalry has finished with them. Ridmark skirmishers and the Rohirrim horse archers also joining in. I mean, now that the Uruk halberds are on the front line, this is where Rohan are going to have to be a lot more careful. The Ridmark skirmishers and the horse archers would probably be best served going after them, and then the lance cavalry going around the flanks. Maybe Denethor would have been a little bit less bummed out if Boromir had been a part of the riders of the Rohirrim, but nope. General abilities into this scenario as well. They're always a little bit of an interesting one. Some of them can be absolutely overpowered, like forcing all units around them to flee temporarily, which can completely ruin someone's front line. But in this case, I think I don't really know what each of them are going to be doing. That one, the Screech, I think is the one that causes localised fleeing. Yeah, the Air of Valberg along with the Sons of Eorl charging in and now having to deal with the Beasts of Gorgoroth, who will not be on the same sort of level in this situation as the Mumakil will be. And speaking of which, surely we're going to be seeing the Haradrim cavalry as well. We'll make our way back into the settlement momentarily. I think actually what we will do is just go down to half speed, temporarily at least. Mordor are really starting to make their way in now, but the Gondorian artillery trying to do the job of heavy and quick damage, because Gondor really are on the back foot here. They're like high, and the Blackguard Barad-dûr as well, all of the really high mass stuff, and Gondor didn't have the most in terms of infantry numbers within the settlement anyway, even with the units they salvaged from the initial retreat. Mordor chose, I mean, up on the walls the Fountain Guard have definitely been doing the business, but there's only so many of them left. You know, the Guards of Osgiliath also, Mordor doing exactly the right thing by targeting them with the Olag High. So it's a small matter of the attacking artillery as well. Meanwhile on this side, Dol Amroth had even less to work with really than the Gondorians did, and unsurprisingly they are going to be banking up around the terrain and the more narrow choke points. The end of the world now that the Rohirrim have arrived. They do have units that they can deal with. The infantry, what little infantry Rohan has, also getting onto the front lines now as well. Westmark Marshals easily able to deal with some of the basic units that we see here. Still some units outside of the walls. Many of them the runic infantry actually. Serpent Guard, they're not going to be too at home in a sheer melee. But then again, neither are the Area of Valberg, very similar units actually in their function. Uruk infantry a little bit isolated as well. Again, any reinforcements they can deny to the attackers getting into that settlement will be of great help, I'm sure. Still a few Beasts of Gorgoroth alive, but you can see maybe the discrepancy in terms of their own survivability. I'm actually impressed there's still some Carmel's Immortals alive considering the initial charges they took, but things have become a little bit more scattered now. Riders of the Fold getting attacked by both Sauron's Will and Beasts of Gondor, not where they want to be. Pretty tough for a horse archer unit, but that's a little bit much for them. And then we come on the way, and the Sons of Yor going to try and directly take them on. Swords and axes drawn. Oh no, they're waving off. They thought better of it. They looked small when they were on the horizon. It's crazy how that happens. Camel Archer's going to pursue them as well. Again, I don't really know how much Rohan have left in the tank. I mean, this is part of the issue when you've got regular units of Lancers and you ask them to do a lot of heavy lifting like this. Sometimes it can be a little bit much for them. Oh, there goes the Witch King. And also killed by the Shield Maidens. A happy little accident. I'm sure they were trying to... Ah, there we see. Infighting. That's what the Screech does. That must be from the other Mordor army, I suppose, because we just saw the General perish. Unless that was the death scream. We'll go with that. Sounds more interesting. Yeah, they have secured the opening courtyard. Managing to push through. Still some Fountain Guard fighting up on the walls. Doing a very impressive job. Trebuchet will be hoping to do the business, but yeah, banking up on this side as well are the Gondorians. That is a lot of Kai though that they're going to have to try and stop. I mean, the Fountain Guard are a better place to do that than most. The other Trebuchet crew. Ooh, there goes Theoden. Killed off by a Serpent Rider. So the Trebuchet that was higher up in the settlement, its crew is now manning the front line as well. How much they have left in reserve though? Veterans. Trebuchet is still firing away. But the arrival of the second reinforcing army. The infantry, and I believe that also means that the Gondorian cavalry has arrived, and actually it's going to be mostly the Gondorians, I think, that are going to have to try and take on the Mumakil in an interesting turn of events. Another unit of Lords of Gondor. I mean, they have killed off one unit here. It does look as though the Rohan cavalry and the camels were also involved. In come the Mumakil now. Sons of Yor, there's only 5 of them left, mind you. I mean, the javelins of the Medicel Guard would bring them down in short order. Which is probably why the Mumakil are trying to get them involved in a melee fight first and foremost. Ah. 2 instances of the general ability being used in short order there. The Lords of Gondor managing to kill off another of these Mumakil. Another unit of Sons of Yor doing a nice job, the Lords of Gondor. So this Gondorian cavalry, adding to the Rohirrim ones, they have now managed to seize the momentum out here, and they should be able to clean this up, and then between the Gondorian infantry and what's left over here, they could deal with what's left of the Easterlings outside the walls. Streaking down from the hill, another unit of Riddermark skirmishers, the last unit that the Rohirrim have in reserve. Everything is now committed. The Uruk chieftains, meanwhile, trying to finish off these Sons of Eor. Haradrim archers up on the Mumakil, trying to chip in with as much damage as they possibly can. Again, these javelins, so many of them will hit their target because of how big the Mumakil are, and yeah, it falls. So all of the Mumakil are now gone. Medicel Guard are still very much alive as well. 82 of them. That's a big unit to have for the late game. Very good and multifaceted, and it looks like they still do have some javelins remaining. So let's see what the Gondorians are doing over here. And what remains of Rhun outside the walls are not going to be able to stop all of the Gondorian reinforcements. I can't remember what the gentleman from Pelagia was called, but I remember the one from Lasarnak was called Furlong the Fat. And Rhun are no match for him and his boys here outside, trying to set up a little bit of a backstop. They're going to need more than one unit of halberdiers, I think, in order to make that work. Vanguard of King Alisar as well. So they're on the clock now, are the attackers, but they are still making good progress. I mean, Gondor really not going to be able to stop these guys. So far, this has been pretty much to code about how the battle went, which is quite impressive. Although I believe Dol Amroth did have cavalry that did sally out of the gates later in the battle as well, which isn't going to be able to happen here because they will perish, covering that retreat. Dol Amroth doing a good job over here. Halberdiers holding things down on the front. Rhun sending more units in, but the Narrim and the Ardenheim shadow bows are going to be a little bit of a problem for them. Ranger on ranger combat. It's a distinct possibility. The Morgul chosen at the end of that arm-piercing damage from the halberds. Guildsmen. Camel's chosen as well. I mean, these reinforcements will probably have to prioritise assisting the Gondorian side of the defence, because Dol Amroth seems to be holding fine for the moment, and all of Mordor's high tiers appear to be trying to make progress over there, possibly to try and silence that one trebuchet that still had a bit of ammunition left. Eastland's putting up a brave effort to delay the Gondorians as much as they possibly can. Halberds on the walls as well. You know, I doubt the Gondorians will use the siege towers. I think they probably will. Well, they could, I suppose. I mean, considering the fact that Rhun have got a bit of a defence going on here, they could use Mordor's own towers against them to circumvent defensive positions that they're setting up. One of them could have made it all the way in here. Didn't last very long against the Fountain Guard and the spears of the trebuchets. I mean, do Gondor have anything left? They do. And Nimlothian Honour Guard, Parathor champions from Dol Amroth making their way across Haven Guard. So yeah, they do have good quality units over here. It's whether or not they have them in a high enough quantity to be able to reverse this momentum. Then again, the play surely is going to be just hold out as long as possible and hope the reinforcements arrive. Or javelins. Saw them momentarily firing their javelins up on the walls not long ago. And that one unit of halberds putting on a brave effort to try and hold back the tide of Gondorian reinforcements on their own, but that's not going to last too much longer, you would suggest. And then some Citadel Guard, another welcome sight. Yeah, Uruk halberds, unsurprisingly routing in the face of the vanguard of King Alisar with all of his infantry around him. Still some Riddermark skirmishers. Their javelins could come in handy even in the interior of the settlement. Some red shields as well. Mounted variants of the Westmark Marshals, who I don't think any of them survive. Shock infantry has a smaller shelf life. That's not the end of the world. We've still got Axemen of the Sarnak. It does look as though they're going to utilise Mordor's own siege towers against them as well. Some pretty battered infantry and archers still marshalling the walls. Yeah, looks like they're going to run out of steam over here though. Talon Knights getting involved on the front line now, which should be enough to give Dol Amroth the edge, but the Valkoth tribesmen might be enough to swing the balance of power back the other way. Javelins in a siege like this can be so effective. So yeah, pretty much the entire outer ring of Minas Tirith is under attacker occupation. That's pretty much the only part of the battlefield now where they are. They're sandwiched in between the initial defenders and the reinforcements now. Can they fight their way through? Gavrim managing to pin a unit of Axemen of the Sarnak up against the wall. Scion Rim in there as well to help anchor everything in place. unit of spears. Sort of progress over here, pushing their way up now. In this part of the settlement of Minas Tirith we've seen at the final stand before. Still the Olag High are in pretty rude health, but the Haven Guard and the Perithil Champions and the Nimlothian Honor Guards have plenty of high damage units, and the Olag High have seen a fair amount of combat at this point. They're going to try and get some point blank hits with the Troll Catapult. 2 units of Athelian Rangers firing into this blob as well. I mean, that's going to do horrendous damage, especially to the South Runs that are trying to contest this choke point. Oh no, they still do have a unit of cavalry, to be fair to them, Dol Amroth, the Haven Knights. Temple Executioners, I mean the Gondorians try to force their way through the gatehouse now. Victory almost a certainty for the time being, but Gondor are up on the walls. Gondor Spearmen won't like being in melee against a pretty healthy unit of Flag Rim, mind you, but they will be winning in other areas, I guess. I mean, not here, next to the Sarnak, up against Carmel's Chosen. That's even worse for them. Yeah, maybe guilty of sending them in drips and drabs too much here. The Gondorian reinforcements. Axemen and Citadel Guard on the front line now, but having to deal with the Nazgûl sneakily in and amongst there as well. So it's not over yet. Both sides certainly have their reasons to be cheerful. See here, the Axemen of the Sarnak actually able to get down from the walls and now in behind enemy lines. They'll be able to feast on these Orc Javelins pretty quickly. As highly as I rate the Orc Javelins, when you catch them in melee, that is not where they do their finest work. Then again, pretty much a clean shot, well, definitely a clean shot for the Temple Guard here. And also the Uruk Chieftains are now here, so they will be pinned in place, and this might be the end for this unit as well from the Gondorians. Gondor Spearmen getting up onto the walls. More Gondor Spearmen. I mean, formation is looking a little bit messy from Mordor at this point, but plenty of high tier units keeping Gondor bound. Now though, Medicel Guard able to get down from the walls. Not there to support the Gondor Spearmen, mind you. Carmel's Chosen still waiting there. Talon Knights have been able to force their way forwards, and they'll finish off what remains of the attackers' archers up on this section of Minas Tirith. Yeah, I mean, victory pretty much for Dol Amroth, but then they undermanned this attack willingly, the attacks, I think, to hold on to the outer walls against the reinforcements and also to prioritise attacking against Gondor. And even then, I mean, it's going to be a pretty close run thing. They might win, but neither side is going to have really anything left of much consequence. Dragon's Wrath Guild can probably tilt the balance of power in favour of the attackers there, especially if they can use some of their throwing daggers. Medicel Guard able to get down from the walls, but having to pathfind and reorganise themselves, so they won't be able to use their javelins just yet, which I think was the idea. They are going to be intercepted by a unit of the Flag Rim. Citadel Guard getting up onto the walls now as well. Pelagia Marines looking to surround the primary attack over here, but they will be stopped by the Scion Rim, and again another small battle that the attackers will win, but over here the attempted push up the hill has gone badly wrong, you would suggest. The Olag High are all well and good, but all of the supporting units were ripped apart by especially the Ranger Fire, but also all the high damage units that Dol Amroth have over here. And that's not enough, they've also got the Talon Knights. So Dol Amroth also sending over the bulk of their forces over here. And they could counterattack down the hill, and it may end up being that the initial defenders now have to act as the reinforcements for the reinforcements. And again, yeah, Temple Executioners up against Gondor Spearmen. But you can feel the heat being turned up really on the attackers. They need to probably vanquish these reinforcements pretty quickly and then regroup. and try and go all as one against the defenders up on the higher portion of the settlement. And 45 Medicel Guard remain, maybe not enough to finish off those flag ring. Carmel's chosen. Fair play to this unit of Gondor Spearmen in a fight that they would certainly not have chosen. They're doing quite well. There goes the Harad general. I don't think Harad have too much left, honestly. That might be enough to rout what little remains. It's going to largely come down to Mordor's elites and a bit of Easterling support for the attackers' hopes here. Lothian Honour Guard are down here, and they will fight against the Uruk chieftains, who have already taken a bit of damage, so again you would definitely back the Gondorians in this fight. Rim. Players admitting defeat now. I would imagine that's probably Harad. Pelfalas Marines. Athelian Rangers now, having already really done the business against that attacking force, now getting involved in melee as well. Everyone must take up their swords in order to vanquish the invaders now. Stelgard defeat seeming certain. Pelagian Marines. Nothing on guard. As much as they do have armor piercing, they're still not the quickest in terms of dealing damage. They really are the defensive bulwark, the Gondorian high tiers, which we seem certain for the Carmel's chosen. So they will hold on to the gatehouse here. What happened to the vanguard of King Elisar? Power Knights over in the distance. Still hanging out outside the walls. It looks as though pretty much entirely cavalry. Medicel Guard are definitely in here. Still doing the business. Ah, there they are. Right in front of me. And they're going to cut and carve their way through the flag rim now. The defenders fancying their chances, according to the announcer, and I would be inclined to agree. The attackers don't really have anything left that they can call upon in reserve. They've still got some high quality units, but it's going to be a matter of numbers here, and now the counter-attack does begin down the hill again. Dol Amroth with all of their high tiers over here at the front and centre of it, and also surrounding the Sion Rim now. That one unit of Citadel Guard pinning them in place, and surely that will be the end of Rhun over here, and as they push downwards they will be able to help bail out those units that Gondor have fighting for the gatehouse. Some Pelagian Marines free also. Uruk chieftains trying to turn around, but peeling themselves off, and then Lothian Honour Guard comes with its own set of hazards. That's going to be a nice victory for them. Few dead Olakai over here. And they were always going to be a really important part of what Mordor were trying to do when they had that momentum earlier on in the fight, but it was always going to be fairly difficult to keep that going. Some arrows still as well. Impressive that they still have ammunition and going after the right kind of target as well in the Gamp Rim. These Gondor Spearmen, in these little pockets of resistance that they've been putting up, they've lasted far longer than you would expect them to, considering they're up against units that are far stronger than them and or have armor piercing. This goes to show how resilient Gondor are as a fighting force, I suppose. Vanguard doing damage at a rate of knots now. They might even be able to save that initial unit of spears, which will be something. Shadow bows look like they finished off actually the Talon Knights that were up there. There were only 10 of them to be fair, or 11. There goes a Gondorian general. I think that is the reinforcing general as well. The runic one also falls. Unsurprising given the situation he was in. And that's going to be enough to finally rout the remaining Easterlings fighting for this hill. And that will open the way for all of these reinforcements to pour down into the streets. Larger Marines beginning the engagement, but you'd imagine Dol Amroth will be the ones to finish it. Carlos Chosen still in pretty good health. Gamprin taking some nasty javelin fire from outside. Riddermark skirmishers trying to do their thing. I mean, in come the Gondorian cavalry, and this isn't necessarily going to be that pleasant for them, straight into the teeth of a unit of halberds. But they are going to be able to push their way through. No morale drops for the Gamprim, however, standing firm in the face of a unit they're strong against. Nazgul are still alive. Still all 10 of them are alive as well, but they only really are capable of putting the hammer down when they've got suitable support around them, and that is melting away at a rate of knots now. Scion Rim. Lords of Gondor. The initial unit of Lords of Gondor, of course, were killed to the last man, which again is possibly another thing that we would have to say against the accuracy of this. The fact that Faramir very likely perished out on the Pelennor fields. Gamprin again getting charged from the front, this time by the Pinnith Gaelan cavalry. Course chosen. In the flag rim. Seen quite a few examples actually of infantry units lasting just that little bit longer in melee than maybe you would expect them to, which has been to the benefit of both sides today. But at this point I think it's just a case of pride for the attackers. Citadel Guard and Athelian Rangers still back in reserve as well. Haven Knights now sallying forth, along with the Lords of Gondor, the one remaining troll, the drummer of the halberd unit, falling by the wayside. And over here, the remaining flag rim, still just about hanging on against the vanguard, but I think they will rout in short order now. And there they go, perfect timing. Another very strong unit now freed up with the Mark skirmishers. And the thing is, like, they are charging to the front of halberdiers, but that must be the Mordor general. Crunching charge into the back of the army there. But yeah, as you can overwhelm polearms like this with suitable cavalry. It's not an efficient thing to do, but in this sort of situation where you're clearly so far in the ascendancy and you can just utterly crush anything that's left of the attackers if you do this. With the Mark skirmishers with axes drawn. Not a huge amount of Rohan left, in fact that might be them and the Medicine Guard who were running around earlier. Maybe the only ones. So many of their riders lay dead out in the fields. Amroth on the way forwards. The Nazgul are now up on the walls. Interesting that the Nazgul is not a general unit. Caught between a rock and a hard place, but then so too are the Haven Guard. This is looking like the location for the attackers' final stand actually, because they've got the Carmel's chosen in the corner, as well as the Nazgul and the Temple Executioners, making the battlefield as small as possible for those really, really strong units. And it will also mean that they're not going to get charged by the cavalry, which is definitely what will happen if they remain down here, as what remains of the rank and file Easterlings are now finding out. skirmishers. They still have ammunition? Probably not. I think they probably used it all on the halberdiers they had a clear view of. Vanguard King LSR. Talon Knights now joining the Haven Guard up on the walls, and the Perithil champions as well. I mean, Dol Amroth will lose this fight because of the Nazgul. Part of the issue though is there is another route up onto the walls, which means the Carmel's Chosen are isolated. Perithil champions should be able to finish them off, and then the key is going to be when you surround these units over here, their melee defense crumbles, and it's far easier to kill them off than even units as strong as the Temple Executioners. And I can think of no better candidate for doing this than the Vanguard of King Elisar. Finishing off what remains, once they're done with the few Easterlings that are still putting on a brave showing at the gatehouse. Held on for quite a long time actually. Again, the amount of resources that the attackers had to commit to stopping the reinforcements actually meant that the initial defenders were able to get the upper hand, and that was how things started to turn. And Minas Tirith will be reclaimed. Yeah, now the Vanguard will move on. No self-guard. Only 22 of them remain, but that's still enough to be a problem. Maybe less so for the 5 Nimlothian Honor Guard. Executioners. Still victory is a distinct possibility. The Indian Rangers making their way onto the walls as well. It's just a case of how many they can take with them now. For a battle that has spanned a large portion of the Pelennor fields and got into the second layer of Minas Tirith, is now condensed into this one section of wall where the battle will be ended. That shield's still down there as well. Another surviving Rohan unit. A little bit of ammunition from down low. 9 Pelagian Marines, not the most in terms of DPS, but in this situation every little helps. Only 9 Haven Guard remain, so that goes to show how serious a foe the Nazgul and Temple Executioners are when they're fighting alongside one another. Still a red arrow over here. Oh, I don't think that's going to last too much longer, so the previously victorious Ardenheim Shadowbows are finally going to be laid low by this unit of Citadel Guard. Did well against the Talon Knights initially though. But their spree is at an end. Shadowbow shaken up. That's going to be the end of them. And weirdly, the armour piercing from the Citadel Guard is most... Oh, a little bit of an echoing effect there. Anyway, the Vanguard have now fully made it up onto the walls. And I would be surprised if the Nazgul weren't the last ones left, although there are only 5 of them now. Yeah, the Athenian Rangers are leaving, which is a little bit of a surprise. I want to make sure that these units are still completely surrounded, although that might be why. The Lothian Honor Guard still look pristine actually, considering the fact that I think they were involved for a little bit against that Olag high push, but I guess that was thrown back so fast that they're still perfectly healthy. Yeah, 7. Probably will be a 6% difference by the end, I would guess. That seems about right. Very competitive. Very lore friendly as well. It's not always the case for battles on this channel. Sometimes there has to be a little bit of mental gymnastics done to explain why certain forces are fighting alongside one another, but not on this occasion. Carmel's Chosen might actually outlast the Mordor forces here. They were definitely prioritised here. Medicel Guard now arriving on the walls also. Lords of Gondor, 37 of them, but cavalry of no use in these fights upon the walls. We just saw in the distance there the final swing of the weapon, so now it truly is a fight of only one location. King Alice are actually pulling back from the walls, which is an interesting call. One Nazgul remains, so they may actually be outlasted by the Temple Executioners. Only 2 of them left. Now, when they're fighting from the front like this, surely the Nazgul will last longer. Better stats as well, even when you take the HP out of the equation. You like the Nazgul's swords? Yeah, there goes the Temple Executioner skewered. The Nazgul will live longer. 13 Carmels chosen in the background. There goes the Nazgul though. Finished, so it is actually the Easterlings that will be the final attackers left standing as we enter the final 1,000 frames. Medicel Guard leading from the front alongside some Dol Amroth infantry. What a fun battle this was. Again, I can certainly appreciate when we have that mix and match sort of style and the gameplay takes centre stage, but when you have fully narrative battles like this as well, there's a lot to be said for it. Belfast Marines wanting to get involved in the final sprint to the finish as well. Medicels, Outfield champions. I mean, Dol Amroth's infantry performed very well in this fight as well. I think you saw the merits of their damage. But there we have it. Victory for the defenders. Minas Tirith holds, not without significant losses, but still very, very nice. And actually, very fittingly, all of the general units are also law friendly as well. Faramir, Aragorn, Imrahil and Theoden. Obviously the Harad and Runic ones, I think you can have a little bit of license there. I can't quite recall if they did have names or not, but certainly Gothmog and the Witch King, but unable to wrest control of Minas Tirith away from the free peoples of Middle-earth. So let's see what did the damage for the Gondorian armies. For Faramir, which was Colonel Speaks, the player who we were watching from the perspective of. The Rangers, of course, were a big help in the latter stages, and they were really what turned things around in terms of that momentum Mordor initially had, but they couldn't deal with that quick damage they did. Veterans doing very well. Lords of Gondor getting squashed outside the walls pretty fast. Action of the Sarlacc very nice. I mean, the Trebuchet, 1,177. That is a huge return from the Trebuchet. The other one, not quite so much, but I think that was the one that was just taking pot shots from the wall, but even so, even with that, it's not a terrible return. Fountain Guard getting over 203 kills as well. And Aragorn's reinforcing army, and Fountain Guard getting 956 kills. That is an enormous return from a single unit of infantry, even though the Fountain Guard are a very accomplished infantry force. That's really impressive. That's one of the highest kill counts we've seen from a single unit of infantry, and certainly from a unit of infantry that is not multiple HP, so it has a little bit more of a shelf life perhaps. I mean, that's very, very impressive. That combined with the Trebuchet, you know, between the two, getting in and around 1,000 kills from 2 units each. That's a big part of the reason why the attackers' efforts crumbled, you would suggest. When you see the kill counts here, I mean, they're getting more than the equivalents from Dol Amroth and Rohan, but again, that reinforcing aspect was always going to be important, and the cavalry is always a bit of a wild card in a situation like this. But yeah, I think that's one of my favourite, if not my favourite, example of a Minas Tirith battle we've had, because it wasn't overly grindy. There was lots going on. Obviously, the theme of the battle was pretty much perfect as well. So yeah, big fan of that one. Big thank you to Flame of Arnor for creating this scenario. Big thanks to all the players as well for being a part of it. Like I said, I do intend to be a part of one of these at some point in the near future. I think we have now hammered out a possible play date, so I think I will be in one of these soon, which is the first time I've played this game in quite a while, so hopefully the battle is of suitable quality that I can do a replay on that one as well. I still do have another custom scenario from Colonel Speaks actually, which I will be doing just after this one, and then there's a few others as well which I got sent on more of the standard maps, which we'll also be chugging through as we make our way through the next few weeks. So that's the recent and near future plan. Beyond that as well, I will be hoping to reorganise things a little bit more, make the channel a little bit more sustainable going forward, so that I don't have to drop off the map essentially for more than a month in the future. But yeah, enough of that. I keep mentioning that at the end of these videos when most people probably already tuned out anyway. It's much better placed in its own channel update video, I think. So yeah, big thank you to Colonel Speaks and Flame of Arnor for sending me this replay and giving me the perspective to see it from, and also Flame of Arnor for making the scenario in the first place. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.